2. Chapter 11. Cockatrice rules his land unto its utter destruction. Cockatrice never buried the bones of his father, nor ever again seemed to think of them. Senex lay in his little heap to the left of the coop door, day and night, untouched. Blowflies saw an opportunity and took it. They slipped underneath his feathers and massed their tiny yellow eggs by the thousands against his ancient flesh. And when the right time had passed, maggots lived in his body. They ate through his eyes until Senex was sightless before heaven. They ate his tongue, and Senex was speechless. They squirmed through his old wooden heart. They dwelt in the little sack of his stomach. They were the only life left in the rooster, and that but for a little while, because Senex had died exhausted, with remarkably little meat on his bones. A stench arose in the land. The poor animals whined and scraped at their noses. Everywhere they gagged and vomited. Eating became impossible, and the smaller and the weaker among them took sick and began to die. The very smell itself was so oppressive, like grief, that small hearts simply could not bear it and stopped beating. This was no plague, because there were no symptoms with the dying. Incredibly, this was just an odor, foul, thick, blighting, and horribly rotten. So those animals who could think most clearly formed a committee in order to carry a petition to Cockatrice. They had no other lord. They found him not in the coop. He had not again entered that building after Senex had dropped down dead before it. They found him idle below an enormous oak which grew near the bank of the river. Next to him was squatting Toad, the same who had brooded over Cockatrice's leathery egg. But neither one greeted the committee as it approached, nor gave them leave to talk. "Well," said a hog, muzzling the ground, "we have come." Toad blinked, hugely but silently. Cockatrice merely turned his red eye upon the hog and slowly twisted his serpent's tail. "Well," said the hog again, shifting his barrel weight from side to side, "we have something to say, to ask," he hastily caught himself, "to ask." Low down among the committee was a mouse, unnoticed. He was darting his eyes from the hog to Cockatrice and back again, fiercely anxious that the meeting be neither lost nor wasted. "Well," said the hog again, and the mouse quickly set his teeth, fighting an urge to cut through the hog's fat obsequiousness and to talk himself. Trees grow slowly, hogs talk slowly, but they didn't have a whole season now for polite and stupid conversation. "It would be the honorable thing to do," the hog snuffled slowly at the ground, "if you, sir, granted your permission that we form a procession and take him out of the land to bury him in some right and distant place, honorably to be sure." The hog took a moment to overturn a stone. "Lord Senex, we mean," he said. "Nope." The word came in a loud bass voice. Everyone had been looking at Cockatrice, expecting the decision to be his, but he hadn't spoken. He only continued to twist his tail and to regard them all with his red eye as from a great distance. With astonishment, everyone glanced from Cockatrice to Toad, and then it was clear that he had spoken. Nevertheless, when the hog began to speak again, all eyes were back on Cockatrice. "No, you say," said the hog, "but surely you understand custom, and surely you are committed to the good purpose of very old custom, and it is our custom to bury our dead. Lord Senex, the rooster with his back to the mountains." "Custom crap!" the mouse cried out suddenly, unable to stand it any longer. "He stinks, and it's killing us!" "And besides everything else," continued the hog, "his body is in a state of decay. No fault of his, of course, nor any fault to you, sir." "Damn," said the mouse. "He is putrefying, sir, and you yourself may have noticed that he sends up a terrific odor, and that odor, if you please, is unhealthy. It is hurting us." "Killing us! Killing us!" cried the mouse. "Nope." It was Toad again, burping answers out of his thick throat, while Cockatrice looked on with his mouth closed. "And so again you say no," said the hog, "but perhaps you do not understand the petition." "The body stays where it is. No honorable," burped Toad. "No end to the smell. No burial. Get out of here." It was astonishing to see how the members of the committee so easily hunched their shoulders and turned and left, each in his own direction, for with that last word the committee had abruptly dissolved, and it was no more. All except for the mouse. He remained with burning eyes and a vibrating chest, so quickly was he breathing, so full of hatred was he. "Murderer!" he squeaked at Cockatrice. But Cockatrice, with one lazy flap of his wings, ascended to a branch in the oak, found a perch, and looked out over the land. "Murderer!" the mouse shrieked again, and Toad, suddenly left alone, bounced round to the other side of the tree trunk to hide himself. From there Toad burped, "You heard, Cockatrice? Get out of here!" After the failure of the committee, the animals of the land broke apart. Each began to make his own way in the world. Each family created its own remedies against the terrible killing stench, but then kept those remedies to itself, and grew narrow-eyed and suspicious over against its neighbors. Each family sought its own food, stored it in secret places, and then wept in frustration upon finding that the stench would always rot it, wherever it was hidden. But there had to be blame for such continuous disaster, so every family blamed the next, with dire threats and menacing looks as they passed one another. The animals of the land descended from speech to snarls, barks, roars, and bleated accusations. And the children, those left living, feared to leave their homes. Almost as evil as the stench was the silence. Senex, however poorly he had ended his rule, had always remembered the canonical crows. He sang them, to be sure, in a disoriented manner, but he did sing them, keeping his animals that way, banding them, unifying them. But Cockatrice never crowed the cannon. So under him the day lost its meaning and its direction, and the animals lost any sense of time or purpose. Their land became strange to them. A terrible feeling of danger entered their souls, of things undone, of treasures unprotected. They were tired all the day long, and at night they did not sleep. And it was a most pitiful sight to see, how they all went about with hunched shoulders, heads tucked in, limping here and there as if they were forever walking into an ill wind, and flinching at every sound as if the wind carried arrows. And their confusion became dreadful when one day the mouse ran among them, screaming for them to come and see Senex's body. "You thought it was one thing," he cried, "but you've got to know. You have to know that it is something else, something worse. Don't blind yourselves. Come and see." For the last time in that land, all of the animals did one thing together. The mouse's intensity moved them. Together they went to the coop and looked. And Senex was only bones. Dry bones, with a scrap of feather here and there. A sad little skull, ribs needle-thin, and strange yellow claws, colored as if they alone were left alive. The animals blinked. "Don't you understand?" the mouse cried. "Senex doesn't make this stink, and it will not go away with him. Something else makes it. Something else is killing us, and we will be nothing until we find out." He lowered his voice and glared at the ring of animals around the bones and himself. "I'll give you a name," he said. No one encouraged him. No one discouraged him. "The name Cockatrice. The stench came with him. There is nothing left of Senex to rot, but Cockatrice sits in his oak, and the stench remains. He is no lord, he is an enemy." At the first mention of Cockatrice, the animals on the outer edge of the circle simply turned and began to walk away. and as the mouse continued his desperate pleading, the circle shrank altogether, until the hog was the last to leave. The mouse skittered after him and bit his leg. "Damn fools!" he squeaked. "Ignorant, mindless, stupid, sloppy, mad, damn fools!" But the hog spun on the mouse, nearly killed him with a snap of his jaws, and lumbered on. Shaking with frustration, the mouse turned back to the bones of the old rooster. Then he saw that one creature yet remained. Toad, hugely blinking his eyes. "The name of cockatrice in vain?" Toad burped. "Useless little bitty mouse. All your chatter useless. Cockatrice sends me to say no more meetings, no more gatherings, no more talk among the animals. Hush!" whispered Toad, a green foot in front of his mouth as if warning a child. "Hush! Go about your business and forget the others. Oh, and the oak, she has a name. She is the terebinth oak." The mouse shot furiously at Toad, but in 3 fat hops he had disappeared safely inside the coop and was gone. Toad went into the coop for more than safety. He had a mission there as well. The 100 hens sat quietly, each upon her own nest, fearful to move anywhere. The place seemed a most foreboding, dark, uneasy hospital. "Let me see," burped the pigeon-footed and ugly Toad. When no one offered to let him see anything, he commanded, "In the name of cockatrice, let me see!" And then he squeezed underneath the nearest hen. She leaped up with a painful squawk. 3 eggs were discovered. Toad broke each of them, and then ordered the poor hen out of the coop. This he did with each hen. Those who were laying he sent out. Those who were not stayed in. Finally, the layers in a flock he forced toward the river and the terebinth oak, where cockatrice awaited them. Cockatrice was not altogether idle in those days. He wanted children. Hundreds and hundreds, thousands of children. And, almost casually, he ignored the tears and the cries of the hens. And he went about getting himself children. All in the open, all under the terebinth oak. Soon the hens bore the blank look of despair upon their faces. Hope, self-esteem, life itself had been tortured out of them, and they had become feathered machinery, bent to cockatrice's bloodless will. Cockatrice never looked them in the eyes. He offered nothing for an egg. And so the space under the oak was crowded with eggs, waiting to hatch. For the first time, cockatrice roused himself. Let but one poor animal step too closely to this treasure, and cockatrice would swoop so suddenly and so wildly from the tree that the creature would die of a faint heart. Toad spent time moving among and turning the eggs. "Over, my pretty," he burped motherly. "The sun on your tummy, the sun on your back, to color your coming a poisonous black. I hear you, my pretty, but give it a little more time before you hatch." He slept on top of the eggs. Cockatrice never slept. When the first round of eggs did hatch, the hens, even in their death walk, were horrified. Some had placed some expectation upon the next generation. Some had even conceived a distorted affection for what cockatrice had borne upon them. But the creatures which crawled out of these eggs were in no way like chicks. Black, licorice-long, damp, each with 2 burning eyes in its head and teeth already in its mouth, they were small, curled serpents, basilisks. Cockatrice swept into the hatching eggs. He roared a greeting which terrified every animal in the land. Then he opened his enormous mouth and swallowed up serpent after serpent. With his throat bulging, he took to the air, flew in great triumphant circles, writhing his tail frightfully, and then passed low over the river water. There he vomited his brood, and the basilisks fell like a black rain into the water. With energy, he drove the hens to produce more and more eggs, even among the shells of the latter ones. He was obsessed, and Toad himself took no more joy in the high office of egg-turner, but began to shrink from the watchful red eye above him. Oh, Cockatrice had his children. He had them by the thousands, and again he performed the ceremony of a flight and a black rain of basilisks into the river. But one hen, even underneath her agony, kept life within her. She did it by a small plot which she carried out, night after night, eternally. She had found a stone the size of an egg, and during the day she sat obediently upon this stone. But when night fell, she would push it to the lower end of her sitting, and quietly beat herself against the stone, slowly, but with force and with pain. Every true egg inside of her she crushed this way before it was laid. She had a patch of crimson feathers at her throat. At the beginning of this borning process, it had been Toad's habit to at least chat and banter with the hens. He played a middle road, doing service for Cockatrice, but at the same time searching for a little forgiveness from the hens who were being so sadly used. But the more earnest Cockatrice became about his children, the more irritable Toad became about everything. He was losing his place. He, who had brooded Cockatrice into this world, was losing the favor of Cockatrice. Toad wanted something, then, something to win back the favor of his lord and to prove his importance. Therefore he was not silent when he came upon the stone egg. Toad still examined the hens, searched their openings to see by the size of them whether this hen or that one continued to be a layer. This, without apology or grace, he crawled underneath them where they sat. One day he pushed himself out from under the hen with fire at her throat and began to scream. "Now, here it is," he cried, hopping among the hens. "What I was looking for, what I knew would be. Treachery, Cockatrice, oh, treachery, a stone egg that could never hatch." His cry turned Cockatrice's head. It also brought a small mouse out of the fields. As soon as Cockatrice was looking, Toad began to hop against the guilty hen. While she did nothing to protect herself, he fired his fat body like a dum-dum at her neck and head, and she began to choke and to cough. "Treachery! Treachery!" cried the Toad with every attack. Immediately the mouse was there. He fastened his tiny teeth in the Toad's face and would not let go. A flurry rippled through the other hens. A few animals were drawn closer by the screaming. Toad forgot the hen. Hop by broken hop, dragging the vicious mouse with him, he struggled closer to the terebinth oak. He cried a new tune. "Son of my sitting," he burbled pitifully, "save me! They're murdering me!" Not to save the Toad, but for other reasons of his own, Cockatrice opened his mouth and roared like thunder above the noise. "Children!" It may have been that, encouraged by the mouse's fight, some of the gathering animals were considering a fight of their own. Perhaps one creature's spirit could give spirit to the others, and a true revolt might begin. A black bear was up on his hind legs, waving his arms with menace. A wolf was tensing his muscles for a deadly spring. But none of that matters much. For as soon as Cockatrice roared his order over the land, the river began to boil, hectic churning. And then out of the water, by the thousands, the basilisks poured. They slimed their way across the land with incredible speed. They shot like arrows among the animals, bit them with poison in their bite, and killed the poor, astonished creatures where they stood. Frantically, the hens exploded away from the terebinth oak, and some few survived, but the rest were no match, and they died. The mouse was killed at the very trunk of the oak, for he had not taken his teeth out of Toad's face, and he had not run. But so was Toad killed. Before the basilisks there was no distinction one from the other. Then the thousands of basilisks spread outward from the oak into all the land, killing and killing every living body they came upon. No animal was prepared to meet such an enemy. None was able to return the fight. Like a black fire, the basilisks ate the land dead until not a soul was left in it, except Cockatrice, sitting silently in his tree. The hog lay down with a single bite in his neck. The bear, with a bite between his toes, was cast upon the ground, his eyes still open. The wolf had gone so far as to snap one serpent up, but that serpent had bitten the wolf on his tongue, and then had slithered unharmed out of a dead wolf's mouth. No longer was Cockatrice's gaze far away. This now was his business. From the top of the terebinth oak he watched the slaughter with attention and with cheer. "Children," he breathed over and over to himself. "Ah, my children." And from below the ground, from within the prison of the earth, there spoke another, greater voice. "Circumspice Domine." Worm rumbled powerfully, almost peacefully. "Videat Deus caedam meum." Let God in his heaven witness all my murder, spoken in the language of the powers. When that land, once under the rule of Senex, the rooster with his back to the mountains, had become a sepulchre, and a wilderness with the dead lying everywhere, then the basilisks withdrew again into the river. Then Cockatrice himself, in his own good time, left the place. He took to his mighty wings and flew west, for so the river flows. And then it began to rain on the earth.